Drag her out. Now. The words didn't echo. They landed, sharp and final, slicing clean through the soft jazz, the clinking crystal, the polite laughter of a room that had never been told no. Every head turned, not because of the volume, but because of who said it. Margaret Whitmore didn't raise her voice often. She didn't need to. Power had a way of carrying itself. And tonight, inside a $12 million estate perched above the Pacific with floor-to-ceiling glass and a guest list curated like a private index of influence, her word was law. 2 security guards near the entrance hesitated for half a second, just enough to confirm they had heard correctly, before stepping forward in unison. Their shoes moved quietly across the polished marble, but the intent behind each step was loud enough to shift the air. In the center of the room stood Jada Sterling. No diamonds. No designer labels screaming for attention. Just a simple black dress, soft fabric falling clean over the curve of her pregnant belly, her hand resting there like instinct, not defense. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She just looked at Margaret. Not with fear. Not even with anger. With something far more unsettling, clarity. She's not family, Margaret continued, her tone colder now, scanning the room as if inviting agreement from people too uncomfortable to respond. A few guests shifted their weight. Someone near the bar lowered their glass. Across the room, a woman whispered something under her breath, but it died quickly, swallowed by the tension pressing down like invisible weight. Jada's husband, Daniel Whitmore, stood just 10 feet away, close enough to hear every word, close enough to do something. He didn't move. His jaw tightened slightly, eyes flicking from his mother to Jada, then away again, as if neutrality could shield him from the consequences forming in real time. That silence said more than anything he could have spoken. The guards reached Jada, slowing now, uncertain. One of them cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, rehearsed politeness stretched thin over discomfort. "We're going to have to ask you to step outside." Ask, not force. Not yet. The room held its breath. Jada tilted her head slightly, as if considering something far removed from the moment. The music hadn't stopped, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to a different room. A different night. She glanced down at her hand resting over her stomach, then back up, her gaze sweeping across faces that had already decided who she was based on what she wasn't wearing, what she wasn't saying, what they assumed she could never be. Then she spoke, quiet enough that people leaned in without realizing it. "You're sure this is what you want to do?" It wasn't a question. It was a line drawn so calmly, it almost went unnoticed. Margaret let out a short laugh, dismissive, practiced. "I don't repeat myself." The guards shifted again, waiting. Daniel exhaled, barely audible, and finally stepped forward half a pace. "Jada, maybe it's better if you just—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The sentence collapsed under its own weight. Something in the room changed then, subtle but undeniable, like pressure building behind glass. Jada's expression didn't break, but it sharpened. Not louder, just clearer. She reached into her small clutch, pulled out her phone, and for a brief second, the glow of the screen reflected in her eyes. Not frantic, not defensive, precise. She lifted it to her ear. "Stay right there," Margaret snapped, misreading the moment entirely. Jada didn't look at her. She didn't look at anyone. "Yes," she said into the phone, her voice steady, almost soft. "It's time." And just like that, the room that thought it had already decided her place realized. Too late. It had just stepped into something it didn't understand. The word time did not echo, but it lingered, settling into the space between crystal glasses and controlled smiles like something invisible had just been set in motion. Jada Sterling lowered her phone slowly, her expression unchanged, her posture steady as if the ground beneath her feet had never shifted at all. The guards paused, not because they had been told to stop, but because something in the room no longer felt simple. Orders had been given, but certainty had quietly disappeared. Margaret Whitmore let out a soft, amused breath, folding her arms as she stepped closer, heels clicking with measured precision across the marble floor. "You really think a phone call changes anything in this house?" she asked, her tone light, but edged with something sharper underneath. Around them, the guests had stopped pretending to ignore what was happening. Conversations faded into silence. A man near the terrace doors adjusted his cufflinks without looking away. A woman by the bar lowered her glass halfway, frozen between sip and shock. No one intervened. They watched. They always watched. Jada did not respond immediately. She turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting across the room, taking in every face, every quiet judgment, every assumption that had already been made about her before she had spoken a single word. Her hand rested gently over her stomach again, not protectively, but instinctively, as if grounding herself in something far more real than the tension surrounding her. "It is not the call," she said finally, her voice calm, even unhurried. "It is what happens after." Daniel shifted where he stood, discomfort now visible in the way his shoulders tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if privacy could still exist in a room that had already chosen sides. "Jada, you are making this worse," he said, the words careful but hollow. "My mother is trying to protect this family." Jada looked at him then, really looked, her expression not angry, not even hurt, but clear in a way that made his next breath falter. "From what?" she asked quietly. He did not answer, because he did not have one. Margaret's smile thinned. "From people who show up uninvited and expect to be treated like they belong," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the silence. "From people who think a name or a ring gives them access to things they did not earn." A subtle murmur moved through the crowd, not agreement, not disagreement, just the quiet ripple of discomfort when truth and assumption begin to blur. One of the guards shifted his stance again, glancing briefly at his partner, then back at Jada. "Ma'am," he repeated, a little less certain now, "we really need you to come with us." Jada did not move. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something far away. Then it came. Not loud, not dramatic, just the faint, unmistakable sound of a phone vibrating across a nearby table. Then another, and another. Heads turned. A man near the center of the room frowned as he checked his screen, his expression changing in a way he did not quite understand yet. Across the room, a woman's eyes widened as she read something twice, then a third time. The air shifted again, this time faster, like a current moving through. Still water. Margaret noticed it. Of course she did. Control had always been her language, and she could feel it slipping, even if she could not yet see why. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice tightening just enough to betray the first crack. No one answered her, because they were all looking at their phones now. Except Jada. She was looking at Margaret. Steady, patient, certain. Daniel reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out his phone as if the motion itself carried weight. He glanced down, and whatever he saw drained the color from his face in an instant. "Mom," he started, but the word fell apart before it could become a warning. Margaret turned sharply toward him. "What?" she snapped. He did not respond right away. His eyes lifted from the screen to Jada, and for the first time since she had walked into the room, he looked at her not with doubt, not with distance, but with something dangerously close to realization. The guard stepped back without being told. Not far, just enough, because something had changed, and they felt it before they understood it. Jada exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, and spoke again, her voice no louder than before, but somehow carrying further. "You should read it carefully," she said. Every word. And this time, no one in the room mistook her tone for anything less than absolute control. Daniel's phone did not fall from his hand, but it might as well have, because everything else did. His certainty, his posture, the quiet confidence he had borrowed from his last name. It all slipped in a single second as his eyes moved across the screen again, slower this time, as if reading it differently might change what it said. It did not. How insufficient that sounded. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "About what?" she pressed. He hesitated. That was the moment everything broke. Because Daniel Whitmore did not hesitate. Not in rooms like this. Not in front of people who expected certainty from him. But now he did. And everyone saw it. Jada did not look at him. She did not need to. She could feel the shift the same way the room could. The same way the guards had already stepped half a pace back, their authority dissolving into uncertainty. Instead, she looked at Margaret. Calm. Unmoving. Patient in a way that felt intentional, like she had been here before and knew exactly how this would unfold. "Read it," Jada said again, her voice steady, almost gentle, as if she were offering help instead of dismantling everything Margaret believed she controlled. One of the guests, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for never missing a detail, cleared his throat quietly. Margaret, he said, holding up his phone slightly. You might want to see this. There was no accusation in his tone, just fact. That made it worse. Margaret turned toward him, irritation flashing across her face before she reached for the phone he extended. She took it with a practiced motion, already preparing to dismiss whatever she saw. That was her instinct. Control the narrative. Define the moment. But the second her eyes landed on the screen, something in her expression paused. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. The message was not long. It did not need to be. A formal notice. Time-stamped. Verified. Sent to every executive contact tied to Whitmore Holdings and its affiliated properties. A change in control. Effective immediately. Margaret's eyes moved across the words once. Then again. Slower. The room did not breathe. Daniel took a step back without realizing it, his hand lowering at his side, the phone still lit with the same message that had just reached everyone else. That is not possible, Margaret said finally, but her voice had lost something. Not volume. Not clarity. Certainty. Jada's gaze did not waver. It is already done, she replied. No emphasis. No dramatics. Just truth, delivered without the need for permission. A woman near the terrace whispered to the person beside her. Sterling Group. That is her name. The words spread quietly, like a current moving through the room. Sterling. Not Whitmore. Not attached. Not dependent. Separate. Larger. Real. Daniel looked at Jada again, this time fully, his voice barely above a breath. You did not tell me, he said. It was not an accusation. It was confusion layered with something deeper, something closer to fear. Jada tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. You never asked, she said. Across the room, the guards exchanged another glance, then stepped back completely, no longer pretending they were still part of the moment. They were not. They had been given an order that no longer existed. Margaret's hand tightened around the phone, her knuckles paling just slightly as she searched for something in the message that would restore control. There was nothing, because control had already moved. It had never been where she thought it was. Jada took a single step forward then, not toward the exit, not toward the guards, but toward Margaret, closing the distance just enough to make the shift undeniable. You thought I came into this house because of your name, she said quietly. But the truth is, she let the sentence hang for half a second, not for effect, but because the room needed it. Because they needed to feel it before they understood it. Her eyes met Margaret's fully now, steady, unshaken. This house exists because I allowed it. And this time, no one in the room mistook her for anything less than the most powerful person standing in it. The words did not echo, but they settled into the room like something irreversible had just been signed into existence. This house exists because I allowed it. No one moved. Not immediately. Because movement would mean acknowledging what had just been said, and more importantly, what it meant. Margaret Whitmore stood still, the phone still in her hand, her grip tight, but her control slipping in ways she could not conceal anymore. Her eyes lifted slowly from the screen back to Jada, searching for something that could reframe the moment, some angle where this could still be contained, explained, dismissed. She found none. That is not how ownership works, Margaret said, but now her voice carried a thin edge of strain, like something beneath it was beginning to crack. Jada did not react to the tone. She did not need to. You are right, she replied calmly. That is not how you were taught it works. A subtle shift rippled through the guests again. Not loud, not dramatic, just awareness spreading from one person to another as pieces began to align. The name, the notification, the authority that had just overridden everything they thought was fixed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically unsteady. Jada, he said, stepping closer, his voice lower now, almost cautious. What exactly did you do? Jada turned her gaze to him briefly, and for the first time, there was something there that felt like distance measured in years, not feet. I corrected a misunderstanding, she said. Simple, precise, final. One of the guests, the same silver-haired man, glanced at his phone again and spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough that the silence carried it across the room. It is not just a notification, he said. It is a restructuring order. Board authorized. Effective immediately. That word landed differently. Board. Authorized. Immediate. These were not social moves. These were institutional. Margaret's posture straightened instinctively, reflex meeting pressure. There is no board decision without my approval, she said sharply. But even as the words left her mouth, her eyes flicked back to the screen in her hand, scanning again as if the text might rearrange itself into something familiar. It did not. Because the authority had not been removed. It had been replaced. Jada shifted her weight slightly, her presence steady, her hand still resting gently over her stomach, grounding her in a reality far beyond the room. You were not removed, she said evenly. You were outvoted. On its own. Margaret let out a short breath, one that was meant to sound dismissive but did not quite reach its target. Even if that were true, she said, regaining a fragment of composure, this is still my home. It was the last position she had left. The physical space. The place where she had always been unquestioned. Jada's gaze softened slightly, but not with sympathy. With certainty. Look around, she said quietly. Margaret did. Not because she wanted to, but because something in the tone made it impossible not to. The room had changed. Not in its design. Not in its lighting or its carefully curated details. But in its alignment. The people inside it were no longer oriented around her. They were watching someone else. Listening to someone else. Waiting on someone else. Jada took one more step forward, closing the space just enough to make the shift undeniable to even the most resistant eye. You built a life inside systems you thought you controlled, she said, her voice steady, carrying without force. I built the systems. The words did not rise. They settled. And in that moment, the difference between presence and power became impossible to ignore. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around the phone again, but she did not speak. Because for the first time in that room, she did not have the final word. Jada did. The room did not return to normal. It could not. Something too precise had already cut through it, and now every person inside felt it, even if they could not yet explain it. Margaret Whitmore lowered the phone slowly, not because she accepted what it said, but because holding it up any longer made it harder to pretend it was not real. Her eyes stayed on Jada, sharper now, searching, calculating, as if there was still a move left to make. There always had been. Until now. You think a document changes who built this family, Margaret said, her voice steadier than before, but only on the surface. You think numbers on a screen erase decades of legacy. Jada did not interrupt her. She let the words land, let the room hear them, let the weight of them settle before she responded. No, she said quietly. I think they reveal who actually sustained it. The distinction was small, but in that moment, it was everything. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand tightening around his phone as if it might anchor him to something familiar. This does not make sense, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The Whitmore assets, the holding structure, it is all internal. Jada turned her gaze to him again, and this time there was something deeper behind her calm, something that reached beyond the room into years he had never asked about. You never looked beyond what was presented to you, she said. You trusted the surface. Daniel's brow furrowed, confusion sharpening into something closer to realization, but still incomplete. Around them, the guests had shifted fully now. No one pretended this was just a family disagreement anymore. This was structural, corporate, final. A woman near the far wall stepped closer to the man beside her and whispered, Sterling Group underwrites half the coastal development portfolio. The man nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Jada. And the Whitmore expansion last year, he added quietly. That funding did not come from internal reserves. The whispers were not loud, but they did not need to be. They connected. They filled in gaps. They built a picture that had always been there, just never acknowledged. Margaret heard it. Of course she did. Her chin lifted slightly, her posture correcting itself as if defiance alone could re-establish control. You are implying influence, she said sharply. That is not the same as ownership. Jada took a slow breath, her hand still resting gently over her stomach, her presence unshaken by the rising tension. I am not implying anything, she replied. I am stating it. The simplicity of the sentence made it heavier, because there was no room left to reinterpret it. A faint memory flickered behind her eyes then, not visible to the room, but present in the way her gaze softened for just a second before sharpening again. A conference room. 10 years earlier. A long table. A contract slid across polished wood toward her, then paused halfway when the man across from her glanced at her left hand, at the absence of a ring, at the assumptions he had already made. We will need a senior partner to sign off, he had said, polite but dismissive, his tone already closing the door. Jada had not argued. She had not raised her voice. She had simply signed the agreement under a different structure, one that did not require his validation, and acquired the entire firm 18 months later. The memory passed as quickly as it came, but it anchored her in the present, in the pattern that had repeated itself long before tonight. Margaret's voice cut back in, sharper now. Even if you inserted yourself into financial layers, she said, this is still my name, my family, my foundation. Jada stepped forward again, just one measured step, enough to shift the distance into something intentional. Names do not build systems, she said. Execution does. The room stilled again. Not from shock this time. From understanding. Daniel looked down at his phone once more, scrolling now, searching for something that would contradict what he was beginning to see. There was nothing. Only confirmation layered on confirmation, each detail aligning with the next. His voice, when it came back, was quieter. The acquisition last quarter, he said slowly. The one we could not trace, that was you. Jada met his eyes. Yes. No hesitation. No explanation. Just truth. The word landed heavier than anything that had come before it, because now it connected everything. Not just tonight. The years leading up to it. The growth. The unexplained expansions. The silent backing that had never asked for recognition. Margaret's fingers curled slightly at her side, the last fragments of control slipping into something else, something colder, more uncertain. Why? She asked, the question escaping before she could reshape it into something stronger. Jada did not answer immediately. She looked around the room once more, at the people who had watched, judged, aligned themselves without knowing the full picture, and then she brought her gaze back to Margaret. Because I wanted to see, she said softly, how you treat someone when you think they have no power. The silence that followed was absolute. Because now it was no longer about ownership. It was about truth. And there was no structure in the world that could protect anyone from that. The silence did not break after her words. It deepened. Because now everyone in the room understood something they could not unsee. This was never about a misunderstanding. It was a test. And they had already failed it. Margaret Whitmore stood still, but the stillness was different now. It was no longer control. It was calculation under pressure. Her eyes remained locked on Jada, searching for weakness, for hesitation, for anything she could. Still used to regain footing. So this was a setup, she said finally, her tone tightening, reaching for authority she no longer fully held. You walked into my home pretending to be less than you are just to prove a point. Jada did not react to the accusation. She did not correct the word pretending. She simply held Margaret's gaze. No, she said, her voice steady, grounded. I walked in exactly as I am. The distinction landed heavier than any denial. Around them, the guests shifted again, but this time not out of discomfort, out of awareness. Because what they had witnessed was not deception. It was exposure. Daniel stepped back another half step, the distance between him and Jada now impossible to ignore. His voice came quieter, almost unsteady. You let this happen, he said, not accusing, not defending, just trying to understand something that no longer fit the version of reality he had built. Jada's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but not with apology. With clarity. I did not let it happen, she replied. I stopped it from continuing. That sentence did not raise her voice. It did not need to. It cut clean, precise, leaving no room for interpretation. A faint sound came from across the room as another notification echoed through someone's phone. Then another. The ripple was not slowing. It was accelerating. Information moving faster than denial could keep up. A man near the far end of the room spoke under his breath, but loud enough to be heard. Access credentials are being revoked, he said, staring at his screen. Executive clearances. Internal systems. Margaret's head turned sharply toward him. That is not possible, she said again. But this time the words felt thinner, like repetition was the only thing holding them together. Jada did not look away. It is already in motion, she said calmly. You are watching it happen. The room seemed to shift again, not physically, but in alignment. People were no longer standing where they had been. They were repositioning, subtly, instinctively, as if proximity to power had recalibrated without instruction. The guards were no longer near Jada at all. They had moved back toward the walls, their presence now neutral, their role undefined. Daniel looked down at his phone again, scrolling faster now, his breathing uneven as the details stacked on top of each other. Board signatures. Legal authorization, system override, he murmured, each phrase landing heavier than the last. Then he stopped. His eyes froze on something new. Mom, he said, but the word did not carry authority anymore. It carried warning. Margaret did not look at him immediately. She kept her focus on Jada, as if looking away would concede something she was not ready to release. What now? She said, her voice lower, controlled, but no longer absolute. Jada took a slow step forward, closing the final distance between them, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with a certainty that made the space feel smaller. Now, she said quietly, the system corrects itself. The simplicity of it made it final. No anger, no revenge, just outcome. A woman near the center of the room let out a soft breath, almost a whisper. She is not reacting, she said to no one in particular. She is executing. The words spread, not loudly, but clearly enough to settle into the room. Because that was exactly what this was. Not emotion, not conflict. Execution. Margaret's fingers tightened at her sides, her posture still upright, but the foundation beneath it shifting in ways she could not stabilize. You think this ends here, she said, her tone sharpening slightly, reaching again for resistance. Jada's expression did not change. It already ended, she replied. You are just now seeing it. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, exhaling as if something inside him had finally given way. When he opened them again, he looked at Jada differently. Not as someone he needed to question, not as someone he could explain away, but as someone he had never truly understood. The room held that realization with him. Jada turned her gaze slowly across the space one more time, taking in every face, every silent witness, every shifted stance. Then she spoke again, her voice still calm, still controlled, but now carrying something deeper. Power does not announce itself, she said. It reveals itself when it is challenged. And in that moment, no one in the room had anything left to challenge her with. The room did not erupt. It did not fracture into chaos or noise. It did something far more unsettling. It adjusted. Quietly. Completely. As if every person inside had just recalculated their position without being told to move. Jada Sterling stood at the center of it, not elevated, not announced, but unmistakably above the moment in a way no title could replicate. Margaret Whitmore felt it before she accepted it. That shift, that invisible transfer of gravity. And for the first time in decades, she was no longer the one holding it. This is not finished, Margaret said, her voice firm but no longer absolute. The words pushed forward like a final attempt to anchor something already gone. Jada did not interrupt. She did not challenge. She simply listened, her stillness more commanding than any rebuttal. You think control can be rewritten in a single evening, Margaret continued, stepping forward now, reclaiming space out of instinct rather than authority. You think documents and signatures undo legacy. Jada's gaze remained steady. No, she said quietly. I know they formalize what already exists. The distinction landed with precision. Not confrontation. Correction. Around them, the guests no longer whispered. They observed. Openly now. Because the outcome was no longer uncertain. It was unfolding. Daniel stood between two worlds, neither of which he fully recognized anymore. His voice came low, almost careful. Jada, when did this start? It was not just a question. It was an admission that he had missed something fundamental. Jada turned her eyes to him, and for a brief moment, there was history there. Not emotion, not regret, just time. Before you noticed, she said. The truth did not accuse. It revealed. Daniel looked down again, his phone still alive with updates, confirmations, names shifting in real time. His world had not collapsed. It had been redefined, and he had not been part of the decision. A soft but clear voice broke through the silence from near the far end of the room. A woman who had remained quiet until now stepped forward slightly, her tone measured but undeniable. The legal transfer is complete, she said, glancing at her screen. Primary authority now sits with Sterling Holdings. The words did not need emphasis. They carried their own weight. Margaret turned toward her sharply, but the reaction came too late. Because it was no longer about who spoke. It was about what was already true. Jada took a slow breath, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as the ground beneath her. Then she spoke. Not louder, not sharper, just clearer than anything that had come before. You told your guards to remove me, she said, her eyes returning to Margaret, locking in. With a calm that felt final. From a place you believed was yours. The room did not move. It did not breathe. Because they knew what was coming next, even if they did not know the exact words. Jada's voice did not rise. It did not need to. But you never asked the one question that would have changed everything. A pause. Just enough for the truth to settle before it was spoken. Her gaze did not waver. Not for a second. Who actually owns it? The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of realization, of correction, of a narrative collapsing under its own assumptions. Margaret's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Because there were none left that could reframe what had already been exposed. Jada did not step back. She did not step forward again. She simply stood where she was, completely still, completely certain. Then she finished it. Not as a declaration. As a fact. You tried to remove me, she said, her tone even, unshaken. From a system I built. The sentence did not echo. It settled. And in that moment, every person in the room understood something that could not be undone. This was not a reversal. It was a reveal. Margaret Whitmore had not lost control tonight. She had just discovered she never had it in the first place. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, the weight of that truth settling in fully now, not as confusion, not as denial, but as understanding that came too late to change anything. Jada turned her gaze once more across the room, not searching, not measuring, just acknowledging what had already shifted. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the final line that no one would forget. You mistook silence for absence, she said. That was your only mistake. And this time, no one in the room tried to correct her. The silence did not linger this time. It shifted into something else entirely. Not tension, not uncertainty, resolution. Because once truth settles, everything that does not belong begins to fall away. Margaret Whitmore did not step back, but the space around her widened anyway, as if the room itself no longer recognized her as its center. Her posture remained upright, her chin lifted, but the authority behind it had thinned into something performative, something that no longer carried weight. This is not how power works, she said, but now the words sounded like something she needed to believe rather than something she controlled. Jada did not respond immediately. She let the sentence exist, let it hang in the air long enough for everyone to feel the gap between what was said and what was real. Then she moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, just one step to the side, turning slightly, her gaze sweeping across the room as if she were no longer addressing a single person, but the entire system that had just revealed itself. Power does not work the way you were taught, she said calmly. It works the way it is built. The distinction did not challenge Margaret. It replaced her. Across the room, more phones lit up, more confirmations arriving in real time, each one reinforcing what had already been made clear. Access revoked. Authority transferred. Control reassigned. A man near the terrace shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. This is complete, he murmured. Every division. Every account. A woman beside him added quietly. Even the private trusts. The words spread like a current, quiet but undeniable, filling in every remaining gap. This was not partial. This was total. Daniel stood frozen between them, his earlier confusion now replaced by something heavier, something that settled deeper than shock. Understanding. His voice came low, stripped of assumption. There is nothing left under our name, he said, not asking, not guessing, just stating what he now saw. Jada turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. There never was, she replied. The truth did not land softly. It did not need to. It settled with the kind of weight that did not require force. Margaret's fingers curled slightly at her sides, the last visible sign of resistance tightening into something contained, controlled, but no longer effective. You orchestrated this, she said, her voice lower now, sharper in a different way, searching for intention she could still challenge. Jada met her gaze fully. No, she said. I revealed it. That word carried more weight than anything else spoken that night, because it meant nothing had been taken, nothing had been created, only exposed. A subtle shift moved through the guests again, but this time it was not discomfort or curiosity. It was alignment. People adjusted their stance, their focus, their attention, no longer uncertain about where it belonged. The guards remained. At the edges, no longer participants, no longer necessary. The room had corrected itself. Jada took a slow breath, her hand still resting gently over her stomach, grounding her in something far more real than the power dynamics unfolding around her. Then she turned back to Margaret, closing the moment with the same calm precision she had carried from the beginning. You measured people by what they showed you, she said. I measured you by what you did when you thought it did not matter. Margaret did not respond, because there was nothing left to say that would not confirm it. Daniel looked between them one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? The question was not directed at his mother. Not anymore. Jada did not hesitate. Now, she said quietly, everything moves forward without you. The finality of it did not come from volume. It came from certainty. Across the room, a soft sound broke the silence as someone set their glass down on the table, not out of distraction, but out of recognition that the moment had ended. Not paused, not shifted, ended. Margaret stood still, her presence no longer shaping the room, only existing within it. And Jada, without raising her voice, without demanding attention, had done what no one else in that space had managed to do. She did not take power. She exposed where it had always been. And in doing so, she left nothing behind for anyone else to reclaim. The room did not return to what it was before. It could not. Because something fundamental had been exposed, and once seen, it could never be unseen. The music still played softly in the background, the same polished melody meant to signal elegance and control, but now it felt distant, almost irrelevant, like it belonged to a version of the night that no longer existed. Jada Sterling stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, her hand still resting gently over her stomach as if anchoring herself not to the room, but to something far more permanent. Around her, people no longer whispered. They did not need to. The truth had already settled into every corner of the space. Margaret Whitmore remained standing, but she was no longer the center. She was simply part of the room now, subject to the same reality as everyone else. Her silence was not strategic anymore. It was the absence of control. Daniel stood a few feet away, his phone still in his hand, but no longer reading it. There was nothing left to confirm. He looked at Jada, not with confusion, not with resistance, but with the quiet realization of someone who understood too late that he had misjudged the most important person in the room. Jada finally moved. Not away, not toward anyone, just a slight shift, enough to signal that the moment had reached its natural conclusion. She turned her head slowly, taking in the room one last time, every face, every witness, every silent acknowledgement of what had just unfolded. Then she spoke, not loudly, not for attention, but for clarity. This was never about tonight, she said, her voice calm, measured, carrying without force. The words settled immediately, drawing every eye back to her without effort. It was about pattern, she continued, about what people choose to believe when they think no one is watching. No one interrupted. No one moved. Because now they understood that this was not a reaction. It was a statement, a conclusion. Jada's gaze shifted briefly to Margaret, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far more final. You did not lose control tonight, she said quietly. You revealed how you use it. The sentence landed with precision, not cutting, but clarifying, leaving no space for denial to hide. Margaret did not respond, because there was nothing left that would not confirm it. Jada's eyes moved once more across the room, her presence no longer needing to prove anything, no longer needing to establish authority. It was already done. Respect is not given when it is convenient, she said. It is shown when it costs you something. A subtle shift moved through the guests again, not discomfort, not tension, but recognition. Because now they were not just watching a moment. They were understanding a standard. Daniel took a slow breath, his voice quiet when it came. Jada, he started, but the word did not lead anywhere. There was no question left that had not already been answered. Jada looked at him for a brief moment, and in that look was everything he had missed, everything he had not seen, everything he had assumed instead of understood. Then she turned away, not abruptly, not dramatically, just with the calm certainty of someone who had already said everything that needed to be said. As she moved toward the exit, no one stopped her. No one questioned her. The path cleared without instruction, without hesitation, as if the room itself recognized who she was now, or perhaps who she had always been. The guards stepped aside completely, not out of command, but out of understanding. The doors opened. The night air waited. Jada paused for just a fraction of a second at the threshold, not to look back, not to reconsider, but to leave them with one final truth, delivered without raising her voice, without turning around. "I did not raise my voice," she said. "I raised the standard." And then she walked out, leaving behind a room that would never again mistake presence for power.